Hi, let's talk about social inclusion. Imagine that you're trying to solve a problem, but you're only looking at half the information. Well, that's what can happen with policy documents. Today with my guest Joe Whelan, we explore policy silences, the voices and experiences missing from official plans, in this case related to policies fighting poverty. Joe will help us uncover how hidden perspectives can be crucial, explore creative research methods that bridge the gap, and ask why policymakers need to listen more attentively. Rodrigo Silva, as always, let's talk about social inclusion. Joe, welcome to our episode.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Citing a question which I'm sure you will address, we need to know where the silences are in policy documents because they can affect the understanding of the problem, in this case, poverty. So tell us more about that and why you decided to study this topic.
Yeah, so the paper that we're discussing this morning, which was published as part of a special issue, comes from a broader research project. So the research project was funded by the Irish Research Council, just a small scale piece of research, and it was conducted in partnership with a group called ATD Ireland, who are All Together in Dignity, who are an international anti-poverty organisation, and with a group of community activists and friends of ATD. So the idea was to do a piece of research that was going to be of benefit to ATD as a civic society group. And ATD's mandate is around highlighting the hidden dimensions of poverty. So we often have a econometric or statistical understanding of poverty. We maybe know how many people are experiencing different types of poverty and deprivation, but we don't always or often have a view of what happens behind those figures. So what does it mean to be somebody experiencing relative poverty? What does it mean to be somebody experiencing deprivation? What are the textures of life like for people who are experiencing poverty? And so this research was geared towards uncovering some of those hidden dimensions of poverty, and particularly using creative techniques. So it was based on walking interviews, it was based on photography, on mapping, and so on, as ways to sort of capture and surface lived experiences of poverty. And to your question, policy silences, sometimes silences aren't necessarily overt or kind of deliberate. It can be about omission or what's not there or what's missing from the picture. And so this research was very much about trying to add a new dimension to our understanding of poverty so that we have a fuller picture.
And what would you say then that is the highlights of your study?
I think a study like this and others like it, the highlights are the insights and the deep sort of nuanced understandings that come out of research like this. So again, I'm not in any way saying that we don't need econometric or statistical understandings, because we very much do. They tell us an awful lot at a macro level that's important. But we also need something that perhaps complements and fleshes out those statistics so that we're not just looking at graphs that are somehow untethered to anything real and meaningful. We're also understanding the experiences that perhaps lie behind those graphs. And I suppose the key thing that emerged from this research was being able to understand, for the people that took part, what their experiences of poverty were like. And so lots of things came out of the study. So, for example, lots of people that took part in the study spoke about experiencing socioeconomic discrimination, being discriminated against because of their accent or their dress or their postcode, where they come from. There was a strong link between those who had experienced poverty in childhood and those who continued to experience periods of intense poverty as adults. Poverty was something that was characterized by many of the participants as being as much about a lack of options as it was about a lack of financial resources. And so these are the kinds of highlights that come out of this kind of grounded qualitative study that, again, you don't get with sort of larger level statistical research. So it adds to that canon of knowledge. It allows us to build a more holistic evidence base. And the hope is that it would impact on policy by making real that which can be a little bit abstract when it's hidden in statistics.
And you mentioned before the civic importance of the study and of the research project. So what can these findings, these new perspectives mean for public policy?
Well, again, it's about, I'm going to use a term called muckraking. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, and perhaps people listening to this might have heard of it, but I talk about it in the broader project. And I suppose it's a particular type of sociological approach that exposes what would otherwise remain hidden to the people that need to see it most. So it's associated in the first instance with a guy called Jacob Rees, who was a sort of a photojournalist who photographed the tenements in New York and then showed these pictures to the middle class New Yorkers who were horrified by what they saw and who otherwise would have remained unaware of what they saw. And this led to reform in terms of the tenements in New York. Later, a sociologist called Gary T. Marks spoke about doing muckraking sociology, where you're very much doing sociology on the side of the oppressed and discriminated against, and you're exposing their stories, their narratives, their lives to the people that need to see it the most. And I suppose in a small way, I had hoped to do something similar in this project, so that by documenting the real lives of people in their own words, by exposing some of their lived reality to hopefully policymakers, politicians, civil society groups, and so on, that it might generate a response, that it might result in some action, that it might allow people to think differently about poverty as, again, not just something they see on a graph or they read about in a paper in statistical terms, but something that's actually real, that has people behind it, that leads to particular types of life experiences, and that is bad for everyone and all of society. So in a very small way, I hope to add to that project and to do muckraking sociology by exposing the findings to people that I feel need to hear them, and those people in the main are policymakers.
Let's follow up on that, because by reading your article from this conversation, so what you are suggesting is a new approach, a different approach to understanding inclusion, or in this case, exclusion beyond just graphs, with including these new methods. So that's what future research should focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's new. I think people have been doing it well and successfully for a long time. There is a hierarchy in terms of what research people pay attention to, and perhaps small-scale qualitative studies suffer a little bit from being placed at the bottom of that hierarchy. I think that's something that maybe needs to change, and perhaps that's where the future lies, is in challenging orthodoxy when it comes to what's accepted as viable, substantive research. Mm-hmm. And so you can only do that by continuing to conduct research of this type, but also speaking to other researchers doing research of this type, so that there's a tapestry that's being brought together and it's not just discrete or siloed pieces of research. So I very much see that as something that we could think about doing in the future. I also think creative methods. So in the paper that we're discussing this morning, I write about how people are excluded or omitted by not having ways in which to participate that cater to their particular needs or abilities or expressions and so on. And so I think fostering creative ways of doing both research and policy making is an important point of consideration for the future also, because not everybody is able to take part in a direct way. So we're sometimes good at doing inclusion. We ask people what they think. We ask them if they'd like to be interviewed or take part in a group or a project. But maybe we need to think about, well, not everybody necessarily wants to be interviewed or be in a focus group or is comfortable in those spaces. So how are there other ways in which we can include people? So in this project, I went for a walk with people. We had a conversation. They took some photographs. I asked them to draw a map of the walk and address the landmarks on the map and so on. And we also then, as an output, developed a 12-minute animated short which captured the voices of the participants. So again, a creative way of exposing and unpacking and surfacing experiences of poverty in this case. But I think creative methods could be broadly applied to different areas of social research. And I think that is very much something we should consider for the future.
Mm-hmm. Great. Can you share with us, your own personal reflections after conducting this study and of these findings?
I think, again, working with groups who are already at the coalface of these kinds of social issues is important. So my partnership with ATD and with the community activists, upon reflection, was key to the success of this project and key to the outputs that have arisen from this project. I think that's really important, that as academics, we wouldn't be sort of siloed or in our ivory towers, in quotation marks, that we would actually seek partnership with civil society groups and civic society groups that are working on these issues day in, day out, because that's often where the best knowledge of these issues lies, and we can bring something to that partnership and they can bring something to that partnership. So upon reflection, that was a really key component to the success of the project and to the outputs, including the paper that we're discussing this morning. I've said it already, but I think, again, thinking creatively about how to do research so that you can include people who mightn't be comfortable being included in conventional or traditional ways. You can think about things like power in the research relationship and how to diffuse that. So going for a walk with someone is a very equalizing thing. You're walking along together, there's less hierarchy, it's a conversation, and the landscape itself becomes an important component of that relationship and often evoke testimony that you wouldn't get in a conventional interview. So there are lots of reasons, again, to encourage creative research methods where possible. It's not going to always be feasible to use these kinds of methods. There are some things that perhaps are more sensitive in nature and require more traditional or conventional approaches, but where reasonable and where possible, and reflecting on the success of the project, I think the creative methods really are what allowed it to be as successful as it was.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. In no more than 2 sentences, if you had to give a PowerPoint presentation title to this conversation, what would it be?
I suppose what I probably would say is it's important to have a deeper understanding of what poverty means for people.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
That's probably where I would leave, because if I keep going, it'll be 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sentences.
No,
so.
and it's a great punchline, and we have a great episode. Joe, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
This podcast is powered by Cogitatio Press. You can listen to this episode on the Let's Talk About Social Inclusion website, on Cogitatio Press YouTube channel, and whatever you get your podcast.